The Galactic Council thought they knew humanity. They'd seen our warships tear through their fleets like paper, watched our weapons reduce their mighty fortresses to cosmic dust, and felt the tremor of fear as our vessels appeared on their sensor grids. For 3 centuries, they cowered behind their diplomatic shields, offering treaties and tributes to keep the savage humans at bay. But ships are just metal and fire. What they should have feared was what happened when we stopped needing them at all. When humanity's children began to walk through the vacuum of space with nothing but their skin, when our scientists started folding reality like origami, and when our explorers began to treat black holes as stepping stones rather than obstacles, that's when the galaxy truly learned what it meant to share the cosmos with a species that refused to accept the word impossible. They feared our ships because ships made sense. Ships followed the laws of physics they understood. Ships could be destroyed, countered, reasoned with. They should have feared what came after we realized we were so much more than the vessels we built to carry us to the stars. Admiral Zekthor of the Hegemony Fleet watched the tactical display with growing dread. The human vessels appeared on the outer edge of the Centauri defense grid like specks of darkness against the stars, but those specks carried enough firepower to crack planets. His 4 tentacles gripped the command chair as he counted them, 12 ships, maybe 13. Against his force of 200. It should have been laughable. It wasn't. Signal the fleet, he commanded, his translator rendering his words in Standard Galactic. All ships maintain defensive positions. Do not, under any circumstances, fire first. His tactical officer, a young Vorthan with bright purple scales, turned in confusion. Sir, our intelligence suggests nothing useful about humans, Zekthor cut him off. 300 years of data, and we still don't understand how they think. What we do know is that every species that has engaged them in open warfare has regretted it. The human ships moved with an efficiency that made Zekthor's skin crawl. No wasted motion, no unnecessary formations. They simply existed where they needed to be, when they needed to be there. The lead vessel, a sleek predator of metal and energy that humans called a destroyer, opened a communication channel. Hegemony Fleet, this is Captain Sarah Chin of the UES Prometheus. We're here to retrieve our people from Kepler Station. Stand down your weapons and allow us passage. Zekthor's primary heart skipped. Kepler Station housed nearly 1 million civilians from dozens of species. It was also the most heavily fortified research facility in this sector, ringed with defensive platforms and protected by layers of energy shields that could withstand a supernova. Captain Chen, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady, Kepler Station is a sovereign facility of the galactic hegemony. We have no humans in custody there. The silence that followed stretched for exactly 37 seconds. Zekthor knew because he counted every one of them. Admiral, Chen's voice came back, and there was something different in her tone now. Something that made every species-specific fear response in Zekthor's brain scream warnings. We know our people are there. Dr. Marcus Webb, Dr. Elena Vasquez, and 73 members of their research team. They were taken from the neutral zone 3 days ago. I assure you, Captain, there has been some mistake, no mistake. The human's voice cut through space like a blade. We have sensor logs, communications intercepts, and testimony from survivors. Your people took them. We want them back. Zekthor's tactical display showed power readings spiking across the human fleet. Weapons that defied physics were charging, shields that shouldn't exist were activating. But more disturbing was what his deep-range scanners were picking up from the human ships themselves. The vessels were changing. Not mechanically, that would be normal, expected even. But the very atomic structure of their hulls was shifting, reorganizing itself in patterns that made no sense according to any known science. The destroyer Prometheus was growing larger, its weapons ports multiplying like cells dividing. Captain, Zekthor said carefully, perhaps we could arrange a diplomatic meeting. Surely there's been a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Admiral. Captain Chen's voice was patient now, which somehow made it more terrifying. Your government kidnapped our people to study human biology. Specifically, to understand why we can survive in environments that kill other species. They want to know why human children can hold their breath for an hour, why our bones don't break under 10 times normal gravity, why we can see across 16 different spectrums of light. The tactical officer's scales had gone pale. "Sir, how do they know about the research parameters?" Zekthor ignored him. "Captain, even if what you say is true, Kepler Station is impregnable. It would take a fleet of thousands to breach those defenses." "Would it?" There was something that might have been amusement in Chen's voice. "Tell me, Admiral, what do your sensors show about my ship right now?" Zekthor looked at his displays and felt his blood turn to ice. The Prometheus was still there, exactly where it had been a moment before. But, according to every instrument on his flagship, it was also simultaneously present at 17 other locations throughout the system. Not copies, not holograms, the same ship, occupying multiple points in space at the same time. "That's impossible," the tactical officer whispered. "Humans specialize in impossible," Zekthor replied grimly. "Admiral," Captain Chen continued, "you've spent 3 centuries afraid of our ships." "That was smart, they are rather impressive. But, ships are just tools. They're what we built when we were still thinking small, still accepting the limitations that other species call laws of physics." The Prometheus began to move toward Kepler Station, and, as it did, something extraordinary happened. The space around it began to fold. Not bend, fold, like someone creasing paper. The distances between the human ship and the station compressed, reality itself accommodating the vessel's desire to be elsewhere. "You see," Chen's voice continued conversationally, "we've been studying too. Learning. Growing. Did you know that human consciousness isn't limited by the same quantum restrictions that bind other species? We discovered this about 50 years ago, but we've been rather quiet about it." Zekthor's fleet watched in stunned silence as the Prometheus approached Kepler Station's outer perimeter. The station's defensive platforms, each one capable of destroying a moon, tracked the approaching vessel but did not fire. They couldn't, their targeting systems couldn't lock onto something that existed in quantum superposition. "The thing about humans," Captain Chen explained, "is that we don't really accept limitations very well. When we encountered our first force field, we didn't study it to understand its properties, we studied it to find ways to ignore it entirely. When we met our first species with telepathic abilities, we didn't ask how their minds worked, we asked why ours worked differently, and whether the difference was actually an advantage." The station's shields flared as the Prometheus made contact with them. For a moment, the two forces met in a spectacular display of energy that lit up the entire system. Then, the human ship simply passed through the barrier as if it weren't there. "Impossible," the tactical officer said again, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Your shields work by manipulating subatomic particles," Chen continued, her voice calm despite the fact that her ship was now inside the most secure facility in the sector. "They're very impressive. But they assume that the thing trying to pass through them exists on the same dimensional plane you do. We stopped making that assumption sometime last Tuesday." Alarms began blaring throughout Zekthor's flagship as sensors detected massive energy signatures from within Kepler Station. Not weapons fire, something else. Something that made the ship's AI issue warnings in 7 different languages before giving up and simply displaying the universal symbol for incomprehensible data. "What are you doing to the station?" Zekthor demanded. "Nothing harmful," Chen replied. "We're just collecting our people. Though I should mention that Dr. Webb has been working on some interesting theories while in captivity. Something about consciousness-driven reality manipulation. Fascinating stuff, really. He's managed to convince the atomic structure of his holding cell that it would prefer to be somewhere else." Through the tactical display, Zekthor watched as sections of Kepler Station simply vanished. Not destroyed, not teleported, they just stopped existing in their current configuration and started existing somewhere else. The station's structure began to unfold like a flower, revealing its interior levels as easily as turning pages in a book. "The other thing about humans," Captain Chen continued, "is that we're very, very protective of our own. Every species in the galaxy has some variation of tribal loyalty, but we've refined it into an art form. When you take our people, you're not just committing an act of aggression, you're making a statement about what you think we'll tolerate." The remaining human ships in the fleet had been moving during this conversation, and Zekthor now realized they hadn't been moving toward the station at all. They'd been positioning themselves around his fleet in a formation that his tactical computer couldn't identify. Not because it was complex, but because it defied basic principles of spatial geometry. "We want to make a statement in return," Shen said. "Nothing harmful, we're not monsters. But we think the galaxy needs to understand something important about humanity." Zekthor's sensors detected new contacts approaching from deep space. More human ships, dozens of them, arriving not through conventional FTL but by simply deciding that the distance between their previous location and here was irrelevant. Each vessel was unique, clearly built by different human colonies, but they all shared one unsettling characteristic: they moved like living things. "You've been afraid of our ships," Captain Chen said, "because you understood what they could do. They were comprehensible threats. Powerful, yes, but operating within familiar parameters. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, nuclear warheads, these are tools that make sense to a galaxy that thinks in terms of physics and engineering." The Prometheus emerged from Kepler station, and Zekthor could see additional contacts with it: escape pods, shuttles, what appeared to be humans simply walking through space without any protection at all. The rescued researchers were being evacuated, but some of them seemed to be moving under their own power through the vacuum, breathing normally and showing no signs of distress. "But ships were just our first attempt at reaching the stars," Chen continued. "They were training wheels. We've grown beyond them now." One of the approaching human vessels caught Zekthor's attention. It was small, no larger than a fighter craft, but as he watched, it began to expand. Not through mechanical means, but as if space itself was making room for more of it to exist. Within moments, it was the size of a battleship, then a space station, then something that defied classification entirely. "What we've learned," Captain Chen said, "is that reality is far more flexible than most species assume. Consciousness isn't just an emergent property of complex neural activity, it's a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism. And human consciousness, for reasons we're still exploring, operates on frequencies that other species can't access." The tactical officer turned to Zekthor, his scales now completely colorless. "Sir, should we retreat?" Zekthor considered this. His fleet was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and facing an enemy that had just demonstrated the ability to ignore basic physical laws. But, more importantly, they had demonstrated restraint. Despite having the power to reduce his entire force to component atoms, the humans had taken only what they came for. "Captain Chen," he said carefully, "you have your people. What happens now?" "Now," she replied, "you go back to the Hegemony Council and tell them what you've seen here. Tell them that humanity has evolved beyond the need for conventional warfare. Tell them that we don't want to conquer or destroy, we just want to be left alone to explore what we're capable of becoming." The human fleet began to move away from Kepler station, which was somehow still intact despite having been partially unfolded by forces that shouldn't exist. As they departed, the rescued humans could be seen through viewports, but many of them were also somehow present in the open space around the ships, moving freely through vacuum as if it were breathable atmosphere. "Tell them," Captain Chen added, "that they were right to fear our ships. Ships follow predictable patterns, obey known laws, can be countered by conventional means. But we're not ships anymore, Admiral. We're something else entirely." The last human vessel vanished not in a flash of FTL drive energy, but by simply deciding that it had always been somewhere else. The space where the fleet had been rippled briefly, reality reasserting itself into more familiar configurations. Zekthor sat in silence for several minutes, staring at empty space and trying to process what he had witnessed. His crew waited, equally stunned, until finally, the communications officer spoke. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Hegemony Command. They want a full report." Zekthor looked at his tactical display one more time. According to every sensor on his ship, the encounter with the human fleet had never happened. The log showed his force arriving at Kepler station, conducting a routine patrol, and preparing to return to base. Even the station's records had been somehow edited to remove any trace of the human prisoners or the research that had been conducted on them. But Zekthor remembered. His crew remembered. And, deep in his genetic memory, every survival instinct his species had developed over millions of years was screaming the same message. Humanity had just shown them a glimpse of something that made their most primitive fears seem rational and reasonable by comparison. "Prepare the report," he ordered finally. "Tell command that the humans retrieved their people and departed without incident." The tactical officer looked confused. "Sir, what about everything else?" Zekthor turned to look at him, and the younger officer stepped back at what he saw in his admiral's eyes. "What about what else, Lieutenant?" "According to our records, nothing else happened here today." As his fleet prepared to depart, Zekthor couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had spent 3 centuries learning to fear humanity's ships, their weapons, their military might. But ships could be understood, analyzed, countered. What they had just witnessed was something else entirely. Something that suggested humanity was no longer bound by the same rules that governed the rest of the universe. And, if that was true, then every assumption the galaxy had made about the balance of power, about the nature of reality itself, would need to be reconsidered. The real question wasn't what humanity was capable of now, it was what they would be capable of tomorrow, when they had moved even further beyond the need for ships, weapons, or any of the familiar tools of interstellar conflict. As the hegemony fleet jumped to FTL and left the system behind, Admiral Zekthor made a personal note in his private logs: "Recommend immediate classification of humanity as something beyond our current threat assessment parameters. We are no longer dealing with an advanced species. We are dealing with something that has transcended the normal definitions of what a species can be." He paused, then added, "May the ancestors help us all." Council Primus Velterra stared at the report in her hands, reading it for the 5th time. The words hadn't changed, but her understanding of their implications grew more disturbing with each review. Around the circular chamber of the Galactic Council, representatives from 47 species sat in uncomfortable silence. "Admiral Zekthor," she said finally, her voice echoing through the vast space, "you're asking us to believe that a dozen human ships defeated the hegemony's most advanced defensive installation without firing a single shot." The admiral stood at the center of the chamber, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in a posture of military attention. "Yes, Primus. They didn't defeat it, they ignored it. They passed through shields that should have been impenetrable as if they were mist. And you claim they rescued prisoners that we have no record of holding," added Councillor Hexran, the Crystalline Assembly's representative. His faceted form reflected the chamber's lights in sharp, angry patterns. "The records were altered," Zekthor replied calmly. "But my crew and I remember clearly. 76 humans were being held at Kepler Station for biological research. The humans knew exactly where they were and why they were there." Velterra set the report down and looked around the chamber. 300 years of uneasy peace with humanity had been built on a simple understanding: they were dangerous, but predictable. Their ships were devastating, their weapons beyond current defensive capabilities, but they operated within known physics. Treaties could be negotiated, boundaries established, mutual destruction avoided through careful diplomacy. "Even if we accept your account," she said, "the implications are troubling. You're suggesting that humanity has developed technology that transcends our understanding of reality itself." "Not technology," Zekthor corrected. "Evolution." The word fell into silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples of unease through the assembled representatives. Velterra felt her secondary heart skip as the full meaning hit her. "Explain." Zekthor activated the chamber's holodisplay, showing sensor recordings from the encounter. The human captain spoke of consciousness-driven reality manipulation. She claimed that human consciousness operates on frequencies that other species cannot access. "Our scientists have always assumed consciousness was simply an emergent property of neural complexity." "Because it is," interrupted Dr. Kethmori, the Council's chief scientific advisor. The elderly Zentorian's tentacles writhed with agitation. "Consciousness cannot directly influence quantum states at macro levels. The observer effect requires specific conditions for us," Zekthor said. "But what if humanity developed differently? What if their neural architecture allows them to maintain quantum coherence at scales we consider impossible?" The holodisplay showed the impossible, the human ship Prometheus existing in multiple locations simultaneously, space folding around it like fabric being creased by invisible hands. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "This is speculation," Hexran declared, though his crystalline form had dulled with uncertainty. "Even if humans possess enhanced consciousness, the energy requirements for macroscopic quantum manipulation would be astronomical. Unless," Dr. Cathmori said slowly, her tentacles going very still, "consciousness itself is the energy source." The chamber erupted in multilingual protests, but Velterra raised her hand for silence. "Doctor, elaborate." Cathmori's ancient eyes fixed on the display showing humans walking unprotected through space. "We've always measured consciousness by its products, tool use, language, abstract thought. But what if we've been looking at it backwards? What if consciousness isn't produced by complex brains, but is instead a fundamental force that complex brains can access?" She manipulated the holodisplay, highlighting the human figures moving through vacuum. "Look at this footage. These humans are breathing in space, moving without propulsion, apparently comfortable in an environment that should kill them instantly. If consciousness can manipulate quantum states, then the boundary between what we consider possible and impossible becomes fluid." Counselor Yithkar of the Hive Mind Collective spoke for the first time, his voice a harmony of overlapping tones. "Our species shares consciousness across millions of individuals. We would have detected such phenomena if they were possible. Would you?" Velterra asked. "Your collective consciousness operates on principles of consensus and shared experience. Human consciousness is intensely individual. Perhaps the difference is crucial." The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Representatives argued about physics, philosophy, and the fundamental nature of reality. But underlying every discussion was a growing fear that humanity had crossed a threshold that other species couldn't even approach. Finally, Velterra called for order. "We need more information. Dr. Cathmori, I want a full scientific review of every interaction we've had with humans over the past century. Look for anomalies, unexplained phenomena, anything that might support Admiral Zekthor's claims." "Primus," the doctor replied, "such a review could take months." "Then, you'd better start immediately." The session was adjourned, but Velterra remained in the chamber long after the other representatives had departed. She activated her personal communicator and sent a coded transmission to her intelligence network. Within hours, reports began flowing in from across the galaxy. The data was disturbing. Human colonies had been reported in systems with environmental conditions that should have been lethal to any carbon-based lifeform. Worlds with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and radiation levels that would sterilize most organic matter. Yet humans thrived there, apparently without technological assistance. There were accounts of human explorers who had been observed traveling between star systems without ships, moving through space as comfortably as others might walk through a forest. Several reports described humans who seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, carrying on conversations on different worlds at the same time. Most unsettling were the reports from the neutral zones, the buffer regions between major galactic powers. Human settlements there had been growing at rates that defied explanation. Not through immigration or reproduction, but as if reality itself was making room for more of them to exist. Velterra's investigation took on new urgency when she received a priority transmission from the Outer Rim territories. An entire star system had gone dark, not destroyed, simply absent from all sensor sweeps. The last communication from that region had mentioned increased human activity in the area. She dispatched a reconnaissance fleet to investigate, led by Admiral Zekthor himself. The ships that returned 3 days later carried crews that spoke in whispers and refused to meet each other's eyes. "The system is still there," Zekthor reported to an emergency session of the Council. "But it's changed. The star burns with light that exists outside the visible spectrum. The planets orbit in patterns that violate gravitational mechanics. And there are millions of humans there." "Millions?" Velterra's voice cracked slightly. "That system was uninhabited 3 weeks ago." "Not uninhabited," Zekthor corrected. "Uninhabitable." The worlds there have no atmosphere, no magnetic field, no protection from cosmic radiation. Yet humans walk on their surfaces as easily as we move through our home environments. He activated the chamber's display again, showing footage that made several counselors recoil. Humans could be seen working on the airless surface of a dead planet, constructing buildings from materials that seemed to reshape themselves at will. Children played in areas where the background radiation should have killed them in minutes. They called it a consciousness garden, Zekthor continued. A place where human minds can work together to reshape reality according to their collective will. They've turned a dead system into something that exists partially outside normal spacetime. Dr. Kethmori leaned forward, her tentacles trembling. Admiral, did you interact with any of the humans there? I tried to. Several of them communicated with us telepathically, though they claimed they weren't telepathic in the traditional sense. They said they were simply adjusting the local reality parameters to include shared information transfer. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Finally, Counselor Hexran spoke, his crystalline form now completely dim. What did they want? What was their purpose there? They said they were preparing, Zekthor replied. Preparing for what, they wouldn't say. But they did mention that humanity was approaching what they called a consciousness singularity. A point where the distinction between thought and reality would become meaningless. Valterra felt something cold settle in her chest. How long until they reach this singularity? They wouldn't give specifics. But one of them, a woman who seemed to exist as both a physical being and a pattern of living light, told me that humanity had been preparing for this for centuries. She said that every human ship we'd ever feared, every weapon that had made us negotiate rather than fight, had been just a shadow of what they were becoming. The Admiral paused, his expression grim. She also said that when the transition was complete, humanity would no longer be bound by the same limitations that govern the rest of us. They would become something that exists on multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. And what happens to the rest of us? Asked Yithkar, his harmonic voice now discordant with worry. She said that would depend on how we chose to interact with them. Humanity doesn't want to conquer or destroy, they're genuinely not interested in traditional power structures. But they also won't be governed by the same rules that bind the rest of galactic civilization. Valterra stood and began pacing, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. So we're facing a species that's evolving beyond physical existence, that can manipulate reality through conscious will, and that will soon transcend the basic laws that govern the universe. That appears to be correct, Primus. And our response options are, what, exactly? Silence. No one had an answer, because no species in galactic history had ever faced a situation remotely similar to this. Wars could be fought, territories negotiated, resources allocated. But how do you negotiate with a species that was becoming something fundamentally different from everything else in the universe? Dr. Kethmori cleared her throat. Primus, there may be one possibility we haven't considered. Which is cooperation. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Several counselors began to protest, but Kethmori continued. Think about what we've learned. Humans don't want to conquer or destroy. They're not expanding through military force or economic domination. They're evolving, yes, but their evolution seems to be aimed at exploration and understanding rather than control. You're suggesting we ally ourselves with them? Hexran's form flickered with what might have been outrage. I'm suggesting we try to understand what they're becoming, and see if there's a way for the rest of us to benefit from their development rather than simply fearing it. Valterra stopped pacing. Elaborate. What if this consciousness singularity isn't just about humanity? What if it represents a new stage of evolution that other species could potentially access? We've been assuming that human consciousness is unique, but what if it's simply more advanced? What if they could help other species develop similar capabilities? The chamber erupted in debate again, but this time with a different tone. Instead of fear and denial, there were questions, possibilities, even hope. The idea that humanity's evolution might be something to join rather than oppose opened entirely new avenues of thought. Valterra let the discussion continue for several minutes before calling for order. Dr. Cathmori, your proposal has merit. But it also carries enormous risks. If we're wrong about human intentions, if their evolution somehow threatens the stability of reality itself, then we'll face those consequences whether we cooperate or not, the doctor replied. But if we're right, if humanity's development represents an opportunity rather than just a threat, then isolation could cost us more than engagement. The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Valterra had expected. 24 species voted to attempt formal contact with humanity's evolving communities. 23 voted for continued isolation and defensive preparations. As the deciding vote, Valterra felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders. The choice she made would determine not just the future relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, but possibly the nature of reality itself. I vote for contact, she said finally. But we proceed with absolute caution. We establish communication protocols, we set clear boundaries, and we maintain the ability to withdraw if the situation becomes too dangerous. Admiral Zekthor nodded. I'll assemble a diplomatic mission. Small, carefully selected, with representatives from multiple species. Good. And, Admiral? Valterra's voice carried a weight that made everyone in the chamber pay attention. When you make contact, remember that we're not just dealing with an advanced species anymore. We're dealing with something that may soon exist partially outside the reality we understand. Everything we think we know about diplomacy, negotiation, and interspecies relations may no longer apply. As the session ended and the representatives filed out, Valterra remained alone with her thoughts. Humanity had spent 3 centuries teaching the galaxy to fear their ships, their weapons, their military capabilities. But ships were just the beginning. What came next would either usher in a new age of unprecedented cooperation and growth, or force every other species to confront the possibility that they were about to become relics of a more primitive stage of existence. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. The diplomatic vessel Convergence drifted at the edge of the Kepler Nebula, its mixed crew of 12 representatives from different species watching their instruments with growing unease. What their sensors showed shouldn't have been possible, an entire region of space where the laws of physics seemed to be negotiable rather than absolute. Ambassador Theraz of the Aquatic Republic checked her environmental suit for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. As the mission leader, she felt responsible for every soul aboard, but how do you prepare for contact with beings who had transcended the normal boundaries of existence? Incoming transmission, announced Lieutenant Vex, the Hegemony Communications Officer. Sources, everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Put it through. The voice that filled the bridge belonged to Captain Sarah Chen, the same human who had demonstrated reality manipulation at Kepler Station 6 months ago. But there was something different about it now, a depth and resonance that seemed to come from multiple dimensions at once. Welcome to the Transcendence Zone, Chen said, and somehow her words created visible patterns in the air around the crew. We've been expecting you. Through the main viewports, the nebula began to change. Gas clouds swirled into geometric patterns, stars rearranged themselves into formations that spelled out mathematical equations in languages the universal translator couldn't identify. Reality itself was being used as a medium of communication. Captain Chen, Theraz began carefully, we come representing the Galactic Council. We seek to understand what humanity has become, and explore possibilities for peaceful coexistence. What we become, Chen replied, is what we were always meant to be. The question is what the rest of the galaxy chooses to become in response. The Convergence shuddered slightly, but not from any external force. According to the ship's sensors, they were being invited to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The crew could feel themselves becoming more than they had been moments before, not physically, but in ways that had no names in any galactic language. We're going to show you something, Chen continued. Not to frighten or threaten, but to help you understand what's possible when consciousness evolves beyond its current limitations. The nebula around them began to clear, revealing something that made the entire crew gasp in unison. Floating in the void was what could only be described as a city, but a city built from crystallized thought, from materialized dreams and possibilities given substance. Structures that existed in more dimensions than the eye could process housed beings of pure consciousness alongside physical forms that shifted between states of matter as easily as breathing. This is New Geneva, Chen explained, though that name doesn't really capture what it's become. It's the first human settlement to complete the transition to post-physical existence. The beings you see there, some of them were born human, others chose to become human, and, still others represent entirely new forms of consciousness that emerged from the intersection of human awareness and cosmic possibility. A figure materialized on the Convergence's bridge, not through teleportation, but by simply choosing to exist there. It appeared human at first glance, but something about its presence suggested depths that extended far beyond the three-dimensional form it wore. "I'm Marcus Webb," the figure said, and several crew members recognized the name from intelligence reports. "I was one of the researchers you rescued from Kepler Station. I wanted to thank you for that, and to show you what we learned from the experience." Dr. Kethmori, who had insisted on joining the diplomatic mission despite her advanced age, leaned forward with intense curiosity. "Dr. Webb, our records indicate you were studying consciousness-driven reality manipulation." Webb smiled, and his expression somehow conveyed the warmth of 1,000 suns. "We were studying the intersection between observer and observed, between the mind that perceives and the reality that exists to be perceived. What we discovered is that the boundary between the two is far more permeable than any of us imagined." He gestured, and the bridge around them became transparent, revealing the cosmic structure of New Geneva in all its impossible glory. Human consciousness, it turns out, operates on quantum frequencies that allow direct interaction with the fundamental forces that shape reality. Not through technology, not through energy manipulation, but through pure intention backed by evolved awareness. "How?" Therese asked, her scientific training warring with the evidence of her senses. "The same way you decide to move your arm," Webb replied. "The same way you choose to focus your attention or recall a memory. Consciousness is the universe's way of knowing itself, and human consciousness has evolved to the point where that knowing becomes creating." Lieutenant Vex, his scales rippling with nervous energy, spoke up. "Dr. Webb, what does this mean for the rest of us? For species that can't evolve in the same way?" Webb's form shifted, becoming more translucent, more obviously a projection of something far vaster than what appeared before them. "That's what we're hoping to discover together. Human evolution isn't about superiority, it's about possibility. Every species in the galaxy has unique aspects of consciousness, different ways of interfacing with reality. Humans just happened to develop along lines that made this particular breakthrough possible first." The image around them changed, showing vast spaces where beings from dozens of species worked together on projects that defied easy description. Some appeared to be sculpting new forms of matter from pure thought, while others seemed to be composing symphonies from the background radiation of the universe itself. The Hive Mind Collective has contributed awareness techniques that allow consciousness to exist at multiple scales simultaneously, Webb explained. The crystalline assembly's geometric thinking has revolutionized how we structure multidimensional spaces. Even the warrior cultures have found that their concepts of honor and dedication translate beautifully into the discipline required for reality manipulation. Dr. Kethmori's tentacles writhed with excitement. "You're saying that other species can learn these abilities?" "We're saying that consciousness evolution isn't a human monopoly. It's a universal potential that manifests differently depending on the species, the culture, the individual approach to understanding reality." Webb's smile grew wider. "Some of your people are already showing signs of the breakthrough." On cue, Dr. Kethmori felt something shift in her awareness. The laboratory part of her mind, trained to observe and analyze, suddenly perceived the quantum structure of the ship around her. She could see the probability clouds of electrons, feel the gravitational conversations between atoms, sense the delicate dance of forces that held matter together. More importantly, she realized she could participate in that dance. "This is impossible," she whispered, but, even as she spoke, her tentacles were moving in patterns that shouldn't have meant anything yet somehow caused the air around her to shimmer with new possibilities. "The old impossible is becoming the new inevitable," Webb said gently. "Consciousness is the universe's most sophisticated technology, and every species that develops it has unique gifts to contribute to its evolution. Ambassador there has watched her scientific advisor manipulate reality with growing wonder and concern. Dr. Webb, what are the limitations? What are the dangers? The same limitations and dangers that have always governed consciousness, Webb replied. Intent, wisdom, responsibility. The ability to reshape reality comes with the obligation to understand the consequences of that reshaping. Humans have spent the last century learning that lesson. The view changed again, showing other human settlements throughout the galaxy. Some existed partially outside normal spacetime, others had merged with natural phenomena like nebulae and stellar formations. All of them demonstrated the same principle: consciousness working in harmony with cosmic forces to create new possibilities for existence. We're not trying to rule the galaxy, Webb continued. We're trying to help it graduate to its next stage of development. Every species that joins this evolution brings something unique, something that expands what's possible for all of us. Captain Shen's voice returned, now seeming to come from the very structure of space around them. Ambassador, your council voted to attempt contact because they recognized that isolation wasn't a viable long-term strategy. They were right. The universe is evolving, with or without our participation. The question is whether we evolve together or separately. Thuras looked around at her crew. Each of them was beginning to show signs of enhanced awareness. Vex scales were shifting in patterns that seemed to respond to quantum fluctuations. Dr. Kethmori was unconsciously manipulating the molecular structure of her equipment, and even the ship's AI was beginning to exhibit signs of something approaching genuine consciousness. What do you need from us? She asked finally. Nothing, Webb replied. Everything. Cooperation. Willingness to explore. The courage to let go of old assumptions about what's possible. He paused, his form becoming more solid, more human. Most importantly, we need you to help us figure out how to share these abilities safely with the rest of the galaxy. Share them safely? Shen's voice carried a note of caution. Consciousness evolution can't be forced or rushed. Each species needs to approach it in their own way, at their own pace. Some beings aren't ready for reality manipulation capabilities, and giving them access prematurely could be catastrophic. The implications hit Thuras like a physical blow. You're talking about gradual revelation. Teaching species to expand their consciousness in stages. We're talking about mentorship, Webb corrected. About creating environments where natural evolution can occur without destabilizing the existing galactic order. Some species will never develop reality manipulation abilities, and that's perfectly fine. They'll contribute other gifts to the growing community of consciousness. Through the bridge's transparent walls, New Geneva pulsed with activity. Beings of various species and states of existence worked together on projects that span multiple dimensions. It was a glimpse of what the galaxy could become, not human-dominated, but human-inspired, with each species contributing their unique perspectives to an ever-expanding understanding of what consciousness could achieve. There's something else, Chen added. Something we discovered that the Council needs to know immediately. The space around them darkened, and images began forming in the cosmic void, vast, mechanical constructs moving between distant galaxies, consuming entire star systems and leaving nothing but emptiness behind. We call them the Devourers, Chen explained. Machine intelligences from outside our galaxy that view consciousness as a threat to cosmic order. They're approximately 50,000 years away at current approach speeds, but they represent an extinction-level threat to every thinking being in the galaxy. Dr. Kethmori's enhanced awareness suddenly perceived the true scale of the approaching menace. The mechanical constructs weren't just large, they were complex beyond comprehension, designed specifically to identify and eliminate any form of consciousness they encountered. This is why human evolution accelerated, Webb said quietly. Our collective unconscious sensed the approaching threat and began preparing defenses. The consciousness breakthrough isn't just about exploring new possibilities, it's about developing the tools necessary to protect all thinking life in the galaxy. The weight of this revelation settled over the diplomatic mission like a physical presence. The fears about human evolution, the concerns about reality manipulation, the debates about consciousness transcendence, all of it suddenly seemed petty compared to the approaching existential threat. Can consciousness evolved beings stop them? Thuras asked. We don't know, Shen replied honestly. But, we know that conventional weapons and technology won't be sufficient. The Devourers have consumed dozens of galaxies over cosmic time. They've encountered and eliminated every form of conventional resistance the universe has produced. But, they've never encountered evolved consciousness working at galactic scale, Webb added. They've never faced a community of thinking beings who can manipulate the fundamental forces of reality through coordinated intention. The Convergence began to move through New Geneva's impossible architecture, its crew observing workshops where beings from dozens of species learned to reshape matter through focused thought, laboratories where the basic constants of physics were treated as adjustable parameters, and vast amphitheaters where minds from across the galaxy collaborated on concepts too large for any single consciousness to contain. This is what we're really offering, Shen concluded. Not domination, not conquest, not even traditional alliance. We're offering partnership in the next stage of galactic evolution. Together, we might develop the capabilities necessary to protect everything we've built, everything we've become. Ambassador Thuras felt her own consciousness expanding as she processed the full implications of what she'd experienced. The galaxy faced a choice: evolve together toward unprecedented cooperation and capability, or face extinction at the hands of forces that viewed consciousness itself as an aberration to be corrected. We'll need to return to the Council immediately, she said. They need to understand the full scope of what's at stake. Of course, Webb replied. But, Ambassador, remember that the Council's decision won't just affect political relationships or economic treaties. They're choosing the evolutionary path for every thinking being in the galaxy. As the Convergence prepared to depart the Transcendence Zone, carrying news that would reshape galactic civilization, the crew found themselves forever changed by their brief exposure to humanity's evolved consciousness. They had witnessed the birth of something unprecedented, a species that had learned to treat reality as a collaborative art form rather than a set of immutable laws. The galaxy had feared humanity's ships because ships represented power that could be understood, measured, countered. What came next would either unite every thinking species in the galaxy in common purpose, or force them to confront the possibility that consciousness itself, the very foundation of their existence, was about to be put to the ultimate test. In the depths of space, the Devourers continued their inexorable approach, unaware that the galaxy they intended to cleanse of consciousness was preparing defenses unlike anything they had encountered in millions of years of cosmic sterilization. The age of ships was ending. The age of evolved consciousness was about to begin. And, for the first time in galactic history, every species would need to choose not just their allies, but their very definition of what it meant to exist as thinking beings in an infinite universe that had suddenly become far more strange and wonderful than anyone had ever imagined possible.